When Clara Whitmore locked eyes with the horse trader across that dusty Wyoming corral in 1884, she didn't see a business opportunity. She saw the ghost of the man who destroyed her 11 years ago, Ethan Cross. The name still burned like a brand. One stolen dance, one buried secret, and one ruthless land baron would drag them both into a frontier war neither expected to survive. But some loves don't ask permission to return. They just kick down the door and demand you fight for them. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The August heat hit Wyoming like a fist that year. Clara Whitmore sat rigid in her saddle, squinting through dust devils that twisted across the prairie like angry spirits. Sweat traced lines down her neck, soaking into the collar of her work shirt. The fabric stuck to her shoulder blades. She didn't bother wiping it away. Comfort was a luxury she'd stopped paying for years ago. 3 days of hard riding had brought her here, to the edge of nowhere, chasing rumors of a horse trader who supposedly bred animals tough enough to survive winters that killed cattle by the hundreds. Her ranch foreman, Walter Hayes, had argued against the trip. Too far. Too dangerous for a woman alone. Too expensive. Clara had gone anyway. Her ranch was bleeding money. The cattle were thin. The fences needed repair she couldn't afford. And last winter had taken 40 head of livestock. Animals she'd watched freeze to death because she didn't have enough feed, enough shelter, enough of anything that mattered when the temperature dropped and the wind turned vicious. She needed horses. Strong ones. The kind that could pull a loaded wagon through snowdrifts taller than a man. The kind this Ethan Cross supposedly raised. The name meant nothing to her when Walter first mentioned it. Just another frontier trader trying to survive in a territory that killed the weak and buried the unlucky. But Walter had been insistent. Best horses in 3 territories, ma'am. Expensive, but they don't quit. And Cross don't cheat, rare thing out here. So Clara had packed light, loaded her rifle, and ridden west into country she barely knew. Now, staring at the rough wooden sign nailed to a fence post, Cross Ranch, she felt something cold move through her chest. Not fear. She'd stopped fearing much of anything after her husband died. This was different, sharper. Recognition without context. She urged her horse forward. The ranch spread out before her in a shallow valley, wedged between 2 ridges of rock and scrub pine. It wasn't big, but it was organized. Solid fences, clean corrals, a barn that looked like it had been built to last, not just thrown together with hope and bad lumber. Horses moved in the pastures. Beautiful animals, muscled and alert. A man stood near the barn, coiling rope with practiced efficiency. Tall, lean. His hat shadowed his face, but something in the way he moved made Clara's hands tighten on the reins. He looked up, and the world stopped. Clara's breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. She knew that face. Older now, weathered, lines etched deep around his eyes and mouth, but unmistakable. Ethan Cross. Ethan goddamn Cross. Her horse shifted beneath her, sensing the sudden tension in her body. Clara's vision tunneled. The heat, the dust, the mountains, all of it collapsed into the single point of the man standing 30 feet away, staring back at her with the same frozen shock she felt burning through her chest. 11 years. 11 years since she'd last seen him. Since she'd waited at that train station in St. Louis with a bag packed and a future planned. Since she'd stood there for 3 hours, watching every passenger disembark, searching every face for the one that never came. Since she'd finally gone home and cried until she couldn't breathe. Ethan dropped the rope. Clara? His voice hit her like a physical thing. Rough. Disbelieving. The same voice that had whispered promises in the dark, made plans they'd never kept, sworn things that turned out to be lies. She should have turned the horse around, should have ridden away and found horses somewhere else, anywhere else. Should have protected herself from whatever this was about to become. Instead, she swung down from the saddle. Her boots hit the dirt hard. Dust puffed up around her ankles. She faced him across the space between them, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. The air felt thick, combustible. Ethan. Her voice came out flat, controlled. She'd learned control the hard way, through loss, grief, and years of running a ranch that wanted to fail. He took a step forward, stopped. His jaw worked like he was chewing words he couldn't spit out. What are you doing here? Buying horses? She kept her tone cold, professional. I heard you breed good stock. Jesus, Clara, see? Don't. The word cracked like a whip. She saw him flinch. Good. I'm here for horses, that's all. His face hardened. She watched the shock drain away, replaced by something darker, anger maybe, or pain wearing anger's clothes. Fine. You want horses? I'll show you horses. He turned and walked toward the nearest corral without waiting to see if she'd follow. Clara stood there, hating herself for the way her heart hammered against her ribs, hating him for still being able to do this to her after so many years, hating the universe for bringing her here, to this place, to this man she'd spent a decade trying to forget. But she needed those horses. So she followed. The horses were magnificent. Even through the haze of anger and old hurt, Clara could see that, strong-boned, clear-eyed, the kind of animals that could work hard and survive harder. Ethan moved among them with easy confidence, pointing out bloodlines and temperaments in a voice that stayed carefully neutral. Clara asked questions. He answered. They both pretended the past wasn't sitting between them like a third person neither could ignore. These three, she pointed to a matched set of bays. What are you asking? Ethan named a price that made her wince internally. It was fair, more than fair actually, but it would drain most of what she'd saved for winter supplies. She needed those horses more than she needed to eat well in January. Done. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. You don't want to negotiate? You trying to cheat me? No. Then we're done talking about it. She met his eyes, held them. I'll need them delivered. My ranch is 3 days east. I know where your ranch is, Clara. The way he said her name, quiet, almost careful, made something twist in her chest. She looked away first, furious at herself for the weakness. Fine. 2 weeks enough time. I'll have them there in 10 days. She nodded, started to turn away. His voice stopped her. Clara, wait. She didn't turn around. What? Can we talk? Really talk? No. It's been 11 years. I know how long it's been, Ethan. She turned then and let him see the ice in her eyes. I counted every single day of the first year. After that, I stopped giving a damn. It was a lie. She'd never stopped counting, never stopped wondering, never stopped hating herself for still caring, but he didn't need to know that. I wrote you letters, he said quietly. Dozens of them. You never answered. Clara laughed. It came out bitter and sharp. I never got any letters, Ethan. Not one. His face went pale. That's not possible. I sent them. I don't care what you think you sent. I got nothing. She moved closer, anger finally breaking through the careful walls she'd built. You know what I got? Silence. 3 months of waiting and hoping and making excuses for you until I finally accepted the truth that you decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Clara, that's not. I don't want to hear it. She cut him off, voice hard. Ancient history, dead and buried. I came here for horses, and I'm getting horses. That's the only transaction happening between us. She walked past him toward her horse. Her hand shook as she gathered the reins. She hated that he could still do this, reach into her chest and grab hold of things she'd thought were safely locked away. The dance. She stopped, turned slowly. What? Ethan stood in the middle of his corral, hat in his hands now, looking at her with something raw and unguarded in his face. There's a town gathering in Carlisle next Saturday. Music, dancing, the whole territory shows up. So? Come with me. Clara stared at him. You're out of your mind. One dance, Clara. That's all I'm asking. One dance, and if you still want nothing to do with me after that, I'll deliver your horses and disappear. You'll never have to see me again. I already don't want anything to do with you. Then one dance won't hurt, will it? She should say no, should laugh in his face and ride away and never think about him again. But something in his eyes, something desperate and honest, made her hesitate. Why? She asked finally. Because I need you to know the truth, and you won't listen to me here. He took a step closer. One dance, Clara, 2 songs, 10 minutes of your life. If you hate me after that, fine. At least you'll hate me for the right reasons. Clara looked at him for a long time, saw the years etched into his face, saw the loneliness she recognized because she carried the same weight, saw a man who'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time, Against every instinct screaming at her to protect herself, she nodded. One dance. That's it. Relief flooded his face. Thank you. She turned away before he could say anything else, mounted her horse with quick, angry movements, and rode away without looking back. But she felt his eyes on her until she crested the ridge and dropped out of sight. The ride home took 3 days. Clara spent all of them furious. At Ethan, at herself, at the universe for having such a twisted sense of humor. She camped rough, eating jerky and hard biscuits, staring at stars that offered no answers to questions she shouldn't still be asking. What had happened to those letters? Had he really sent them? And if he had, who had made sure she never got them? By the time she reached her own ranch, exhaustion had replaced anger. She rode through the gate as the sun set, turning everything the color of old blood. Walter Hayes met her at the barn, taking her horse's reins with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd been working ranches since before Clara was born. He was 63, gray-bearded, and tough as fence wire. Get what you needed, he asked. 3 horses. Good ones. Being delivered in 10 days. Walter grunted approval. Cross-treat you fair? Clara swung down from the saddle, every muscle in her body screaming. Fair enough. She didn't mention the rest. Didn't mention Ethan's face when he recognized her, or the way her heart had tried to climb out of her chest, or the dance she'd stupidly agreed to. Walter would tell her she was being a fool, and he'd be right. You look tired, ma'am, Walter said, leading her horse toward the barn. Go get some food. I'll handle this. Clara nodded, too exhausted to argue. She walked toward the house, a small, sturdy building her husband had built before the fever took him 4 years ago. It was clean, functional, empty in a way that had nothing to do with furniture. She washed her face in cold water from the pump, ate leftover stew that had gone a little strange in the heat, and fell into bed with her clothes still on. Sleep came hard. When it finally dragged her under, she dreamed of train stations and letters that never arrived, and a man's voice calling her name through smoke she couldn't see through. The next week crawled by. Clara threw herself into ranch work with vicious focus. She repaired fences until her hands bled, moved cattle, checked water supplies, anything to keep her mind occupied and away from thoughts of Carlisle, dances, and promises she shouldn't believe. Walter noticed but didn't comment. He'd worked for her long enough to know when to keep his mouth shut. On Friday, the day before the dance, Clara almost changed her mind a dozen times. She could just not go. Ethan would get the message. He'd deliver the horses as promised and leave her alone. Life would return to its normal rhythm of work, survival, and the quiet loneliness she'd made peace with. But Friday night, lying in bed and staring at ceiling beams she could trace in the dark, Clara admitted the truth she'd been avoiding all week. She wanted to know, wanted to hear what he had to say, wanted to understand what had happened 11 years ago, even if the answer destroyed the carefully constructed story she'd been telling herself ever since. Better to know than to wonder. That's what she told herself anyway. Saturday dawned clear and hot. Clara spent the morning working, then forced herself to stop early. She heated water for a bath, scrubbed away a week's worth of dirt and sweat, and pulled out the one decent dress she owned. It was dark blue. Simple. She'd worn it to her husband's funeral. She put it on anyway. Walter was in the barn when she emerged, and he did a double take that would have been funny under different circumstances. You going somewhere, ma'am? Town dance in Carlisle. His eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. You? At a dance? Don't start, Walter. Wasn't going to say a word. He paused. This got anything to do with Ethan Cross? Clara's jaw tightened. How did you? I got eyes, ma'am, and I ain't stupid. Walter leaned against a fence post, studying her with the blunt honesty that made him both irritating and valuable. He's a good man for what it's worth, keeps his word, treats his people fair. I'm not interested in your opinion of his character. Didn't figure you were. Walter's weathered face creased into something that might have been a smile. But I've known you 4 years now, and I ain't never seen you look at a man the way you looked when you came back from his place. I didn't look at him any particular way. Sure, ma'am. Whatever you say. Walter pushed off the post. You want company for the ride? No. Figured. Be careful. Clara rode out without responding, focusing on the road ahead and trying to ignore the flutter of nervousness in her chest. She hadn't felt nervous about anything in years. Hadn't let herself feel much of anything except the grim determination to survive another season. This felt dangerous, like opening a door she'd locked for good reasons. But she kept riding. Carlisle was a sprawling frontier town that served ranchers, miners, and drifters from a 100-mile radius. Tonight, it was packed. Wagons lined the main street. Horses crowded the hitching posts. Light and music spilled from the community hall, a big wooden building that served as courthouse, church, and gathering place depending on the day. Clara tied her horse and stood in the street for a moment, fighting the urge to mount back up and leave. Then she saw him. Ethan stood near the hall entrance, scanning the crowd. He'd cleaned up, fresh shirt, brushed hat, boots without the usual coating of corral dust. But it was his face that stopped her. The tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes moved across every person, searching for her. He turned. Their eyes met. And just like that first day at his ranch, the world contracted to just the two of them. Ethan crossed the distance between them in long strides. Up close, Claire could see the fine tremor in his hands. Nerves. He was as terrified as she was. Somehow that helped. "You came," he said quietly. "I said I would. Wasn't sure you meant it." "I don't say things I don't mean, Ethan." She kept her voice steady. "One dance? That was the deal." He nodded, offered his arm. Clara hesitated, then took it. His arm was solid beneath her hand. Warm. Familiar in a way that made her chest ache. They walked into the hall together. The music hit them first, fiddle and guitar, fast and bright. The room was packed with people Clara half recognized from various ranch dealings over the years. Conversations stuttered, heads turned, eyes tracked their entrance with the hungry interest of people who lived for gossip in a place where entertainment was scarce. Clara ignored them all. Ethan led her to the edge of the dance floor. "You want something to drink first?" "No, let's just get this over with." Pain flickered across his face, but he nodded. "All right." The current song ended. Couples broke apart, laughing and breathless. The musicians conferred briefly, then launched into something slower. A waltz. Ethan turned to Clara, held out his hand. She took it. He pulled her into the dance with a confidence that surprised her. His hand settled at her waist. Hers rested on his shoulder. They were close. Closer than they'd been in 11 years. Close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his throat moved when he swallowed. They started moving, and Clara remembered everything. The first time they danced had been at a harvest celebration in Missouri, when she was 22 and he was 25. Before loss and hardship had worn them both down to sharp edges. Before distance and silence had destroyed what they'd been building, he'd held her exactly like this. "I wrote 43 letters, Ethan said quietly, his voice barely audible over the music. "Started the week after you left St. Louis. Kept writing for almost a year." Clara's throat tightened. "I never got them." "I know that now." His hand tightened fractionally at her waist. "But I didn't then. I thought you'd gotten them and decided you wanted nothing to do with me." "Why would I decide that?" "Because I was late." The words came out rough. "That day at the train station, I was supposed to meet you at noon. I didn't get there until almost 3, and when I finally arrived, you were gone." Clara's step faltered. Ethan caught her smoothly, keeping them in rhythm. "You were there?" she whispered. "I was there. 3 hours late, but I was there." His eyes held hers. "My horse threw a shoe 15 miles out. Had to walk him to the nearest town, find a farrier, get him reshod. By the time I got back to St. Louis, you'd left." The room spun. Clara couldn't breathe properly. "I waited until 3:30. You never came. I thought—" "I know what you thought. Same thing I thought when you didn't answer my letters." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Took me almost 6 months to accept that you weren't going to write back. Another 6 to stop hoping. Someone kept your letters from me." The realization hit her like cold water. "Someone made sure I never knew you'd tried to reach me." "Who?" Clara's mind raced backward, sorting through memories she'd tried to bury. That year had been chaos. Her mother had died, her father had remarried within months, and Clara had left Missouri to stay with her aunt in Kansas. The letters would have gone to her father's house, to her stepmother, the woman who had made it very clear she thought Clara was a burden, who had been eager to see her gone. Who would have seen any connection to Ethan as a complication worth eliminating? "I think I know," Clara said numbly. Ethan studied her face. "Does it matter?" knowing who did it. Does it change anything? No. His voice went soft, sad. It doesn't change the 11 years we lost. Doesn't change everything that happened since. Clara felt something crack open inside her chest. All the anger she'd carried for so long suddenly felt misplaced, wasted. They'd both been victims of circumstance, distance, and someone else's cruelty. You got married, Ethan said. It wasn't a question. 4 years ago. He was a good man. Fever took him in the winter of '82. I'm sorry. Don't be. We were content. Not what you and I had, but enough. She paused. What about you? Never married. Came close once, but he shrugged. Couldn't do it. Wasn't fair to her when I was still carrying you around in my head. The honesty of it hit Clara like a blow. Ethan, I'm not asking for anything, Clara. I know too much time has passed. I just needed you to know the truth. His eyes searched hers. You didn't leave me. I didn't leave you. We got cheated. Both of us. The song wound down. They slowed but didn't quite stop moving. Around them, the hall had gone quiet. Clara realized dimly that people were watching, had been watching since they started dancing. The whole town was witnessing this reunion, this moment that felt too private, too raw for public consumption. She didn't care. One more dance, she heard herself say. Ethan's eyes widened. Clara, you asked for one. I'm offering 2. She tightened her grip on his shoulder. Don't make me regret it. Something fierce and hopeful flared in his face. I won't. The musician started another waltz. Ethan pulled her closer this time. Not scandalously close, but near enough that Clara could feel the warmth of his body, smell the clean scent of soap and leather. They moved together like they'd never stopped dancing, like the 11 years between then and now had just been a long breath between songs. Your ranch, Ethan said. Walter told me you've been struggling. Walter talks too much. He cares about you. Clara sighed. Winter was hard. Lost 40 head. Can't afford to lose that many again. What if you didn't have to survive alone? She pulled back enough to look at him. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe we were supposed to find each other again. Not the same way we were before. We're different people now, but maybe... He hesitated. Maybe 2 people who've both been alone too long could figure out how to be less alone together. Clara's heart hammered. That's a terrible idea. Probably. I don't need saving, Ethan. I've survived just fine on my own. I know you have. I'm not offering to save you, Clara. I'm offering to stand next to you. His voice dropped. I spent 11 years wondering what happened to you. Now I know. And I don't want to spend the next 11 wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to ask for more than just a dance. The song ended. They stopped moving, but didn't separate. Clara looked up at him, at this man who'd broken her heart without meaning to, who'd carried the same loss she had, who was offering her something she'd stopped believing in years ago. Partnership. Not rescue, but presence. I'm not easy to live with, she said quietly. Neither am I. I don't trust easily anymore. Good. I don't trust people who trust easy. And if this goes wrong, if we try this and it falls apart, I don't think I'll survive it twice. Ethan lifted his hand, brushed his knuckles gently against her cheek. The tenderness of the gesture nearly undid her. Then we don't let it fall apart, he said simply. Clara closed her eyes, felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. She could walk away, go back to her ranch, her routine, her careful loneliness. It would be safe, survivable. Or she could take the risk, trust the man standing in front of her, trust herself, trust that maybe, just maybe, fate owed them something better than the hand they'd been dealt 11 years ago. She opened her eyes. Help me with the ranch, she said. Winter's coming. I need someone who knows horses, knows hard work, knows how to survive when things get bad. And we'll see what happens. She met his gaze steadily. No promises beyond that. We take it slow. We figure out if what we had then can exist now. Deal? Ethan smiled, really smiled, for the first time since she'd ridden into his ranch. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less worn by the years. Deal. They walked out of the hall together into the cool Wyoming night. Behind them, the music continued and the gossip would already be starting. Clara Whitmore and Ethan Cross, dancing like the past 11 years had never happened. Let them talk. Clara had spent too long caring what other people thought, playing it safe, building walls high enough to keep everyone out. Maybe it was time to try something different. Ethan walked her to her horse, helped her mount even though she didn't need help, stood looking up at her with something in his face that made her chest ache. "I'll bring those horses in 10 days like I promised," he said, "and I'll stay if you want. Help with whatever needs doing." Clara nodded. "I'll see you in 10 days." She turned her horse toward home. "Clara?" She looked back. "I'm glad fate's a stubborn bastard," Ethan said quietly. "Otherwise we might never have gotten a second chance." Clara felt something inside her, something that had been frozen for 11 years, begin to thaw. "Me too," she said. Then she rode away into the darkness, feeling the weight of his eyes on her back until distance took him from view. 10 days. She had 10 days to decide if she was brave enough to let him in, to risk the heart she'd spent so long protecting, to believe that maybe, just maybe, some things were worth fighting for twice. The Wyoming stars watched her ride home in silence, keeping whatever judgment they held to themselves. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara Whitmore let herself hope. The 10 days passed like winter molasses, thick, slow, and impossible to rush. Clara worked herself raw, trying to keep her mind occupied. She and Walter spent dawn to dusk reinforcing the north pasture fence, replacing rotted posts that should have been fixed 2 years ago. Her hands blistered, then calloused over. Her back ached. She barely slept. On the 8th day, Walter finally spoke up. "You gonna tell me what's eating at you, or am I supposed to pretend I don't notice you've been working like a woman trying to outrun something?" Clara hammered another nail with more force than necessary. "Nothing's eating at me." "Right, and I'm the Queen of England." Walter leaned against the fence post she'd just secured, studying her with eyes that had seen too much to be fooled by a decent lie. "This about Cross?" "Everything's about the ranch, Walter. Same as always." "Mm-hmm." He pulled out his tobacco pouch, began rolling a cigarette with fingers that knew the motion by heart. "Known you 4 years now. Never seen you jumpy. Angry, sure. Tired, plenty. But jumpy, that's new." Clara wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of dirt across her skin. "He's delivering the horses today or tomorrow. I want things ready." "Horses don't care if the fence is perfect." "I care." Walter lit his cigarette, took a long drag. "He seems like a decent man. And you looked less like a ghost when you came back from that dance than you have in all the time I've known you." "Walter, I ain't saying nothing you don't already know, ma'am. Just pointing out that being alone ain't the same as being strong. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let somebody stand next to you." Clara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Walter had that look on his face, the one that said he'd already made his point and wouldn't be pushed into saying more. She went back to hammering nails. Ethan arrived late the next afternoon. Clara saw the dust cloud first, rising from the eastern road. 3 horses in tow, and a rider who sat his saddle with the kind of easy confidence that came from spending most of your life on horseback. Her stomach did something complicated. She was by the water trough when he rode through the gate. Walter appeared from the barn, moving to take the lead rope for the new horses. Clara stood frozen, watching Ethan dismount with the smooth economy of motion she remembered. He looked tired, trail-worn. But when his eyes found hers, something in his expression shifted, softened. "Told you 10 days, he said. 9.5. You're early. Didn't see the point in waiting." He handed the lead rope to Walter. "These are your 3. Sound, healthy. They'll work hard if you treat them right." Walter ran an experienced hand down the nearest horse's leg, checking joints and hooves with practiced efficiency. "Fine animals. You do good work, Cross." "Thanks." Ethan's attention stayed on Clara. "You got time to talk?" Clara's heart hammered. She'd spent 10 days rehearsing this conversation in her head, planning what to say, how to say it. Now that he was here, standing in her yard looking at her like she was something worth riding 9 days for, every prepared word evaporated. "Yeah," she managed. "Yeah, we can talk." They walked toward the house in silence. Clara was hyper-aware of the space between them, close enough to feel his presence, far enough that they weren't quite touching. The afternoon sun slanted low, turning everything gold and amber. Inside, Clara put coffee on to boil. Her hands shook slightly as she measured grounds into the pot. Behind her, Ethan stood by the window, looking out at the ranch with the assessing eye of someone who understood land and what it demanded from the people who worked it. "You've got good bones here," he said quietly. "Place has potential. Place has problems." Clara set 2 tin cups on the table. "Fences need work. Barn roof leaked all last winter. I'm short on feed, short on cash, and unless this winter's mild, I'll be short on cattle come spring. So you need help." "I need a miracle, but I'll settle for help." Ethan turned to face her. "I meant what I said at the dance. I want to be here. Help you build this place into something that survives." Clara poured coffee, used the motion to buy herself time to think. "Why? You've got your own ranch, your own operation." "My ranch is 20 miles from the nearest neighbor. I've got good horses and a solid setup, but it's—" He paused, searching for words. "It's lonely, Clara. I built that place after I lost you. Used it to bury myself in work so I wouldn't have to think about what I didn't have, but it's never been a home. It's just been a place to exist." The honesty in his voice made her throat tight. She handed him a cup, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The contact sent electricity up her arm. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Trust someone again. Let someone in. I've been alone so long it's become who I am." Ethan took a sip of coffee, grimaced at the bitterness, but didn't complain. "Then we figure it out together. No expectations, no pressure. I help with the ranch. We spend time around each other, see if what we had then can grow into something that fits who we are now." Clara studied him across the table, saw the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair, the weathering that came from years of hard living. He wasn't the young man she'd fallen in love with in Missouri, and she wasn't the girl who'd waited at that train station, but maybe that was okay. Maybe better, even. "Winter's coming," she said. "If you're serious about this, you'll be here for the worst of it. Frozen pipes, starving cattle, days so cold your breath freezes before it hits the air. I know what winter looks like, Clara. And when I'm impossible to deal with, because I will be, I get mean when I'm tired, and I'm always tired." A small smile tugged at his mouth. "I'll manage. And Walter's going to give you hell. He's protective." "Good. You should have someone protective." Clara shook her head, fighting against the hope trying to take root in her chest. "This is crazy. We barely know each other anymore. So we get to know each other again." Ethan set down his cup, leaned forward. "Clara, I spent 11 years regretting what we lost. I'm not asking for guarantees or promises. I'm just asking for a chance. Let me stay. Let me help. And we'll see where it goes." She wanted to say yes, wanted it so badly it scared her, but fear had kept her alive this long. "1 month," she said finally. "You stay for 1 month. Help with the ranch. We figure out if this can work. After that, we decide where we stand." Relief flooded his face. 1 month, I can work with that. And we keep things professional. No expectations. No pressure. Professional, got it. They shook hands across the table like they were sealing a business deal. But the way Ethan's hand lingered in hers, warm and calloused and solid, felt like anything but business. Walter took the news with a grunt that could have meant anything. He showed Ethan to the small bunkhouse behind the barn, barely more than a shed with a cot and a stove. But it was weatherproof and private. "You heard her," Walter said, voice low and deadly serious. "And I don't care how good your horses are. You'll answer to me." Ethan met his gaze straight on. "Fair enough. She's been through enough. Lost her husband, lost nearly everything twice over. She don't need more heartbreak. I'm not here to break her heart, Walter. I'm here to help her keep this place running." Walter studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right then, you can start by helping me fix the water system for the north pasture. Line's been leaking for a week." They fell into a routine that felt simultaneously strange and natural. Ethan worked from dawn to dusk, falling into the rhythm of Clara's ranch with the ease of someone who understood the language of labor and livestock. He fixed the leaking water line, helped Walter reinforce weak sections of fence, spent hours in the barn repairing tack that had been jury-rigged too many times. Clara watched him work with a mixture of appreciation and wariness. He was good, better than good. He knew how to read animals, how to pace himself through a long day's work, how to anticipate problems before they became disasters. But it was the small moments that undid her carefully maintained defenses. The way he brought her coffee in the morning without being asked, having figured out she drank it strong and black. The way he worked alongside her without trying to take over, respecting that this was her ranch, her operation. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, like she was something precious he'd lost and found again. 2 weeks in, they were working together to move a small herd to fresh pasture when Clara's horse spooked at a rattlesnake hidden in the grass. The mare reared. Clara, tired and not paying enough attention, lost her seat. She hit the ground hard, air punching out of her lungs. Ethan was off his horse before her head stopped spinning, dropping beside her with his hands hovering over her shoulders. "Clara, are you hurt?" She couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, just stared up at the sky while her lungs tried to remember how to work. "Clara, talk to me." Fear edged his voice. Finally, air returned in a painful gasp. "I'm fine," she wheezed. "Just knocked the wind out." He helped her sit up slowly, one hand steady at her back. "Take your time. Don't rush it." Clara focused on breathing. In, out, in, out. The world gradually stopped tilting. "That was stupid," she muttered. "Snake came out of nowhere. Wasn't your fault." "Should have been paying attention." Ethan's hand was still on her back, warm through her shirt. She should pull away. Should establish boundaries. Should do 100 things that weren't sitting here letting him touch her like this. She didn't move. "You scare the hell out of me sometimes," Ethan said quietly. "The risks you take, the way you push yourself. It's called running a ranch. It's called running yourself into the ground." He shifted, and suddenly they were very close. "You don't have to do everything alone anymore, Clara." She turned to look at him. His face was inches from hers. She could see the concern in his eyes, the fear he was trying to hide. Could feel the warmth of his breath. "I've been alone so long I don't know how to be anything else," she whispered. "Then let me teach you." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull back. Clara's heart hammered. She should stop this, should maintain the professional distance she'd insisted on. Instead, she closed the gap between them. The kiss was gentle, tentative, like they were both afraid the other might shatter. Ethan's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating tenderness. Clara pulled back first, breathing hard. "That wasn't professional." "No," Ethan agreed. "It wasn't. We said we'd keep things simple." "I know. This complicates everything." "I know that too." He searched her face. "You want me to apologize?" Did she? Clara tried to find regret somewhere in the tangle of emotions filling her chest. Came up empty. "No," she said finally. "I don't want you to apologize." Ethan's smile was slow and warm and made her feel things she'd thought were long dead. "Good, because I'm not sorry." He helped her to her feet, caught her horse, checked her over one more time to make sure she was truly unhurt. Then they finished moving the herd in charged silence, the air between them crackling with all the things they weren't saying. That night, Clara lay in bed staring at the ceiling and accepting the truth she'd been avoiding for 2 weeks. She was falling for him again. Had probably never stopped falling, just gotten good at pretending the free fall had ended. It terrified her. The next morning, Clara woke to shouting. She was out of bed and grabbing her rifle before she was fully conscious, instinct taking over. Outside, pre-dawn gray lit the yard where Walter and Ethan stood by the north pasture fence, both men tense. Clara ran toward them, boots unlaced and shirt barely buttoned. "What happened?" Walter pointed. "Fence is cut, clean cut, not broken, and we're missing cattle." Clara's blood went cold. She could see it now, a section of fence wire severed deliberately, posts pulled aside to create an opening wide enough to drive livestock through. "How many head?" Her voice came out flat, hard. "Won't know until we do a full count, but I'm guessing 15, maybe 20. Walter's jaw was tight. "This wasn't an accident, ma'am. Somebody did this on purpose." Ethan crouched by the cut fence, examining the wire ends. Clean cuts. Good tools. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Clara's mind raced. Cattle theft wasn't uncommon out here, but this felt different, too calculated, too deliberate. "Could be drifters," Walter said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Could be." "It's Kane." The words dropped like stones. Both men looked at her. "Victor Kane?" Ethan stood slowly. The rancher north of here? The land baron north of here, Clara corrected bitterly, owns half the county, wants to own the other half too. Walter spat into the dirt. He's been sniffing around for years, made offers on this place 3 times. Each time Clara turned him down, the offer got less friendly. He's waiting for me to fail, Clara said. Soon as I can't pay my debts, he'll swoop in and take everything for pennies on the dollar. It's a standard operation. She looked at the cut fence, rage building in her chest. But I guess he got tired of waiting. Ethan's expression went dark. You think he's trying to force you out? I think he's been trying to force me out for years. This is just him getting impatient. Clara turned to Walter. Get a count of what we lost. I want exact numbers. And then I'm going to pay Mr. Kane a visit. Clara, Ethan started. Don't! She cut him off. This is my ranch. My problem. I'll handle it. Like hell you will, not alone. They stared at each other, tension crackling. Walter cleared his throat. I'm going to go count cattle. You two figure out who's being stubborn and who's being stupid, ideally before somebody does something that gets them killed. He walked away, leaving them facing off in the growing daylight. You're not going alone, Ethan said again. This isn't your fight. You made it my fight when you let me stay. He moved closer. And even if you hadn't, I'm not letting you ride into potential danger without backup. I've been handling Kane for years without help. And how's that been working out? Ethan gestured at the cut fence. He's escalating, Clara. This isn't a polite offer to buy you out anymore. This is intimidation, maybe worse. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to push him away and handle this herself like she'd handled everything else for the past 4 years. But he was right. Kane was escalating, and going alone was probably stupid. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. You can come, but I do the talking. Wouldn't dream of interfering. Walter's count came back worse than expected. 23 head of cattle missing, nearly a tenth of her entire herd, disappeared in one night. The loss was a gut punch. Those cattle represented months of work, thousands of dollars she couldn't afford to lose. If Kane thought this would break her, though, he'd badly miscalculated. Clara saddled her horse with sharp, angry movements. Ethan matched her pace, saying nothing but staying close. They rode out together as the sun cleared the horizon, heading north toward Kane's sprawling ranch. The Kane property was everything Clara's wasn't, massive, prosperous, maintained with the kind of money that came from controlling water rights, mineral claims, and enough political connections to make laws bend in your favor. The main house was a monument to excess. 2 stories of imported timber and glass windows surrounded by manicured grounds that had no business existing in the middle of Wyoming wilderness. Clara hated it on sight. A ranch hand met them at the gate. Young, nervous, clearly not used to visitors arriving this early and this angry. I need to see Kane, Claire said flatly. Mr. Kane doesn't take visitors without, I'm not a visitor. I'm a neighbor with 23 missing cattle and a cut fence. Get him, now. The hand's eyes widened. He disappeared toward the house at a near run. Ethan shifted in his saddle beside her. You always this diplomatic? You said you wouldn't interfere. I said I wouldn't interfere with the talking. Observing your approach is different. Despite everything, Clara felt her mouth twitch toward a smile. Shut up. Victor Kane emerged from the house 5 minutes later, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man who'd never had to worry about much of anything. He was tall, well-fed, dressed in clothes that cost more than most ranchers made in a season. Clara hated him a little more with every step he took. Mrs. Whitmore. Kane's voice was smooth, pleasant. This is an unexpected visit. I'm missing 23 head of cattle, Kane. They disappeared through a fence that was cut deliberately. You know anything about that? Kane's expression shifted to something resembling concern. Badly acted concern. That's terrible news. Cattle theft is a serious problem in these parts. Don't insult my intelligence. We both know what's happening here. I'm afraid I don't know what you're implying. I'm implying, Clara said, voice hard as iron, that you've been trying to buy my land for years. I've refused every time. Now suddenly my cattle are disappearing and my fences are getting cut. That's not coincidence. That's a message. Kane's pleasant expression didn't waver. If you're experiencing difficulties managing your property, perhaps you should reconsider my standing offer. I'd be happy to take that burden off your hands. I'm not selling. Everyone sells eventually, Mrs. Whitmore. It's just a matter of price and timing. His eyes flicked to Ethan, assessing. And who's your friend? Ethan Cross. I own the horse ranch 20 miles east. Something shifted in Kane's face. Calculation. Ah, I've heard of you. Excellent reputation. Shame you're wasting time on a failing operation. Didn't look like it was failing to me, Ethan said mildly. Give it 6 months. One bad winter and small ranches like Mrs. Whitmore's collapse like wet paper. Kane turned back to Clara. You're a smart woman. You know how this ends. Why drag it out? Clara leaned forward in her saddle. Because it's my land, Kane. My husband built that ranch. I'll be damned if I let you steal it through intimidation and sabotage. Strong words. But words don't pay debts or survive blizzards. Kane's smile never reached his eyes. My offer stands. When you're ready to be reasonable, you know where to find me. He turned and walked back toward his house without waiting for a response. Clara sat frozen, rage burning through her veins like acid. She wanted to scream, wanted to put a bullet through one of those expensive glass windows, wanted to wipe that smug expression off Kane's face with her fists. Ethan's hand settled on her arm. Let's go. He's threatening me right to my face. I know. And there's nothing we can do about it here. His grip tightened. Come on, Clara. This isn't the fight. Not yet. She let him pull her away, but the fury didn't diminish. If anything, it crystallized into something colder, more dangerous. Kane had made a mistake. He thought she'd fold. Thought she was just another widow struggling alone, easy to push around. He was about to learn different. They rode back in silence, Clara's mind already working through strategies. She needed allies, documentation, proof of Kane's sabotage that would hold up in front of authorities. But more than that, she needed to show him she wouldn't break. We need to strengthen your position, Ethan said as they approached her ranch. Make it harder for him to target you. How? Merge our operations, officially. He looked at her steadily. Combine our herds, our land, our resources. 2 ranches working together are harder to destroy than one alone. Clara's breath caught. That's not a small thing you're suggesting. I know. That's practically a marriage proposal. Ethan pulled his horse to a stop, waited for her to do the same. When he spoke, his voice was serious, certain. Then marry me. Clara stared at him. What? Marry me. Combine our ranches legally. Show Kane that you're not alone anymore. That he's not dealing with one struggling widow. He's dealing with 2 established ranchers who won't back down. Ethan, that's insane. Is it? He moved his horse closer. Clara, I came here because I wanted a second chance with you. I meant what I said. I want to build something with you. If we're going to do that anyway, why not make it official? Make it strategic? You're talking about marriage as a business arrangement. I'm talking about marriage as both business and something more. His eyes held hers. I love you. I never stopped loving you. If you tell me you feel nothing, I'll drop this. But if there's any chance you feel the same, of course I feel the same, Clara interrupted, voice shaking. But that doesn't mean, then what are we waiting for? Ethan reached across the space between their horses, took her hand. We've already lost 11 years. I don't want to lose more time being careful when we could be building something real. Clara's heart hammered. This was crazy, reckless. They'd barely had a month together, but it also felt right in a way nothing else had in years. If we do this, she said slowly, it's not just for show. I won't fake a marriage. If we're doing this, we're doing it for real. I wouldn't want it any other way. And if it doesn't work, it'll work. We'll make it work. His hand tightened on hers. Say yes, Clara. She looked at him, really looked at him, saw the man who'd ridden into her life and turned it upside down, who worked beside her without complaint, who kissed her like she mattered, who was offering her partnership, protection, and something that felt dangerously close to forever. She thought about Kane's smug face, about her struggling ranch, about the loneliness she'd carried for so long it had started feeling normal. And she thought about the possibility of not being alone anymore. Yes, she said. Ethan's face transformed. Yeah? Yes, I'll marry you. Clara felt something like fear and hope tangled together in her chest. I'll marry you, and we'll combine our ranches, and we'll show Kane that he picked the wrong fight. Ethan closed the distance between them, leaned across his saddle, and kissed her hard. It was nothing like their first gentle kiss. This was fierce, claiming, a promise sealed in pressure and heat. When they broke apart, Clara was breathing hard and her heart was racing, and she felt more alive than she had in years. We're really doing this, she said. We're really doing this. Kane's going to lose his mind. Ethan grinned. Good. They rode back to the ranch and told Walter, who took the news with surprising calm. About time, was all he said, then went back to fixing the fence like they'd just announced plans to plant different crops. The wedding happened 3 weeks later in the small frontier church in Carlisle. Half the county showed up, some out of genuine well-wishes, most out of curiosity about the widow and the horse trader who'd decided to join forces against Victor Kane. Clara wore the same blue dress she'd worn to the dance. Ethan wore his best shirt and actually looked nervous for the first time since she'd known him. The ceremony was short, practical. The preacher spoke words about partnership and commitment, and Clara and Ethan made promises to each other that felt both terrifying and inevitable. When the preacher pronounced them married, Ethan kissed her in front of everyone with enough heat to make the old ladies gasp and the young ones giggle. Clara didn't care. She kissed him back and let the whole town watch. They were partners now, in every way that mattered, and Victor Kane could choke on it. The wedding celebration lasted until well past midnight, fueled by whiskey and the kind of reckless joy that comes from watching two people gamble everything on each other. Clara danced until her feet ached, laughed until her face hurt, and let herself believe, just for one night, that maybe things could actually work out. But morning came anyway, cold and unforgiving as Wyoming mornings tend to be. Clara woke tangled in sheets that smelled like Ethan, leather and soap, and something distinctly him. He was already up, standing by the window of her bedroom in his undershirt, staring out at the ranch that was now theirs together. You having second thoughts? She asked quietly. He turned, and the smile that crossed his face was soft, real. Not even a little. You? Ask me again when Kane retaliates. When? Not if. Not if, Clara confirmed. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. He'll have heard about the wedding by now. Whole county probably knows. Good. Let him know we're not backing down. Ethan moved back to the bed, sat on the edge. His hand found hers under the blanket. We knew this would make him angry. Angry I can handle. It's what he does when he's angry that worries me. As if the universe had been waiting for that exact cue, Walter's shout cut through the morning quiet. They were dressed and outside in under 2 minutes. The scene that greeted them made Clara's blood run cold. In the main pasture, 5 cattle lay dead, not injured, not sick, dead with foam around their mouths and their eyes wide and glassy. Poison. Son of a bitch, Ethan's voice was tight with rage. Walter stood over the nearest carcass, his weathered face carved into grim lines. Found them like this 20 minutes ago. Checked the water trough. Somebody dumped something in it overnight. Clara's hands clenched into fists. 5 cattle. 5 more animals she couldn't afford to lose. But worse than the financial hit was the message Kane was sending. I can get to you anytime I want. Check all the water sources, she said, voice hard. Every trough, every tank, every stream the livestock can access. If it's contaminated, fence it off. Already started, Walter said. But ma'am, this is bad. Real bad. If word gets out... Word's already out. Ethan pointed toward the road. A rider was approaching, young, moving fast. As he got closer, Clara recognized him as Tommy Fletcher, one of the clerks from the land office in Carlisle. He reined up hard, his horse blowing foam. Mrs. Cross, you need to come to town, now. Clara's stomach dropped. What happened? Kane filed a claim against your property. Says you owe him money from 3 years back, some kind of water rights dispute. He's got paperwork, signatures, the whole thing. Tommy's words tumbled out rapid fire. Commissioner Holloway sent me to fetch you. There's a hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning. That's bullshit, Clara snapped. I don't owe Kane anything. Doesn't matter if it's bullshit if the paperwork says otherwise, Ethan said grimly. He looked at Tommy. Who signed off on this? Judge Morrison. Walter swore, low and vicious. Morrison's been in Kane's pocket for years. Everyone knows it. Clara's mind raced. This was Kane's play. Hit them from multiple directions at once. Poison the cattle, file false claims, use his political connections to tie them up in legal battles they couldn't afford. It was smart, ruthless, and potentially devastating. "We're going to town," she said. "Walter, you stay here. Document everything. The dead cattle, the contaminated water, all of it. Take photographs if you can get someone out here with a camera." "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to fight." Clara turned to Ethan. "You still have contacts at the Territorial Survey Office?" "Yeah, Samuel Reed, good man, honest." "Get him involved. If Kane's falsifying land records, we need someone who can prove it." She looked at Tommy. "Tell Commissioner Holloway we'll be there within the hour." The ride to Carlisle felt longer than it should have. Clara used the time to mentally sort through everything she knew about water rights, property law, and the tangled web of regulations that governed frontier land ownership. It wasn't much. "I should have paid more attention to the legal side," she muttered. Ethan glanced over. "What?" "When my husband was alive, he handled all the paperwork. Records, deeds, filings. I just worked the ranch." Clara's jaw tightened. "After he died, I learned fast, but there are gaps. Things I missed. Kane's been planning this for years, finding those gaps. Then we'll fill them, together." The confidence in his voice should have been reassuring. Instead, it just highlighted how much was at stake. If they lost this fight, they didn't just lose the ranch. They lost everything. Commissioner Grace Holloway met them at the land office, her face tight with barely contained anger. She was a woman in her 50s, steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, with eyes that missed nothing. "This is a mess," she said without preamble. "Kane filed the claim yesterday evening. By this morning, Morrison had already signed off on an emergency hearing order." "That's not legal procedure," Clara protested. "It is if you've got a judge willing to bend rules." Holloway pulled out a thick file, slapped it onto her desk. "Here's what he's claiming. 3 years ago, there was allegedly a dispute over water rights to Silver Creek. According to these documents, your late husband agreed to pay Kane compensation for diverting water that flows through Kane's property first. My husband never agreed to any such thing." "Well, someone signed this agreement, and it's got your husband's signature on it." Clara grabbed the document, scanned it quickly. The signature looked right, too right actually. Her husband's handwriting had been messy, full of loops and irregular slants. This was clean, precise. "It's forged," she said flatly. "Can you prove that?" "Can he prove it's real?" Holloway's expression softened slightly. "I believe you, Clara, but belief doesn't hold up in court. Morrison's going to look at that signature, declare it authentic, and rule in Kane's favor unless we can prove otherwise." Ethan leaned forward. "What about bringing in a handwriting expert?" "Nearest one's in Denver. We don't have time. The hearing's tomorrow at 10. Clara wanted to put her fist through something. Instead, she forced herself to think. "What about witnesses? People who knew my husband, who can testify he never made any such agreement. That might help. But it's still your word against documents that look official." Holloway paused. "There's something else. Kane's also claiming you've been illegally grazing cattle on what he says is disputed territory along your northern border. That land's been part of my ranch for 15 years. According to a survey he commissioned last month, the boundary line is 300 yards south of where you think it is." Ethan swore. "He's rewriting property lines. And he's got a surveyor willing to sign off on it," Holloway confirmed. "Harlan Briggs. Same man who's done half of Kane's expansions over the years." Clara felt the walls closing in. Kane had thought this through, covered every angle. He wasn't just attacking, he was building a legal cage around them. "There has to be something we can do," she said. Holloway was quiet for a moment, then pulled out another document. "There might be. I've been doing some digging of my own. Kane's used this exact playbook before, at least 4 times in the last decade. Small ranchers, usually widows or families in debt. He manufactures disputes, forges documents, uses Morrison to legitimize it all. Then he swoops in and buys the property for nothing. So he's done this before. That helps us how? Because if we can establish a pattern, we can argue it's not just your case. It's systematic fraud. That gets territorial authorities involved, not just local judges." Holloway's eyes glinted. "But I need proof. Real proof. Documents, witnesses, something concrete that shows this is Kane's standard operation." Clara looked at Ethan, saw the same desperate hope flickering in his eyes. "Samuel Reed," he said, "if anyone's got access to territorial survey records, property transfers, all of it, it's him." Can you get him here by tomorrow morning? I can try. Ethan was already moving toward the door. Where can I find him? Last I heard, he was working a survey up near Buffalo Creek, 40 miles north. Holloway pulled out a map, marked a location. That's where his crew's been stationed. I can make it there and back by morning if I ride through the night. Clara grabbed his arm. Ethan, that's necessary. He covered her hand with his. You stay here. Go through every record you can get your hands on. Find anything that contradicts Kane's claims. I'll get Reed. She wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him it was too dangerous, too far, too much to ask. But they were out of options and running out of time. Be careful, she said instead. Always am. He kissed her quick and hard, then was gone. Clara watched him right away, trying to ignore the fear clawing at her chest. Holloway's voice broke through her thoughts. He's a good man. You picked well. Feels more like fate picked for us. Sometimes that's how the best things happen. Holloway gestured to the files covering her desk. Come on. We've got work to do. They spent the rest of the day buried in documents. Property records, water rights claims, survey maps. Claire's eyes burned from squinting at cramped handwriting and faded ink. Her head pounded from trying to make sense of legal language designed to confuse rather than clarify. But slowly, patterns emerged. 4 other ranches in the past decade, all small operations, all targeted with similar claims: water rights disputes, boundary disagreements, debt collections for agreements no one remembered signing, all now owned by Victor Kane. He's been doing this for years, Clara said, voice hollow, just taking whatever he wants, and getting away with it because nobody had the resources to fight back. Holloway made a note on her ledger. But you're not nobody, Clara. You've got Ethan. You've got me. And if Reed comes through, you'll have territorial backing. If he comes through, he will. Reed's one of the few genuinely honest men in the territory. If there's corruption in those survey records, he'll find it. Clara wanted to believe that, needed to believe it. But belief didn't stop cattle from being poisoned or forged documents from looking real. She worked until her vision blurred and Holloway finally sent her to the boarding house to sleep. Clara lay in a narrow bed that smelled like dust and old wood, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Ethan rode through the night, pushing his horse harder than he should have, but unable to slow down. Every minute mattered. Every mile between him and Samuel Reed was time Kane could use to solidify his claims. He reached Buffalo Creek as dawn broke, found Reed's survey camp on the banks of a tributary, and nearly collapsed from exhaustion. Reed took one look at him and shoved a tin cup of coffee into his hands. You look like hell, Cross. Need your help. Ethan drained the coffee, wincing at the bitterness. Victor Kane's trying to steal my wife's ranch using forged documents and corrupted surveys. Reed's expression went hard. Start from the beginning. Ethan laid it all out: the poisoned cattle, the forged water rights agreement, the disputed boundary lines. Reed listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each detail. When Ethan finished, Reed was quiet for a long moment. I've suspected Kane was dirty for years, he said finally. But I've never had proof. He's careful. Uses different surveyors for different jobs. Pays well enough that most men look the other way. Holloway thinks there's a pattern. Other ranches he's done this to. There is. I've seen pieces of it. Reed stood, began gathering papers from his tent. I've got survey records going back 15 years. If Kane's been manipulating boundary lines, there'll be inconsistencies, contradictions between official surveys and what his pet surveyors filed. Can you find them by tomorrow morning? Reed looked at him like he was insane. That's hundreds of documents. I know, but we're out of time. Damn it, Cross! But Reed was already moving, pulling out files, spreading maps across his work table. All right, but you're helping, and we're going to need more coffee. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, cross-referencing surveys, checking boundary markers, comparing official territorial records against the claims Kane had filed over the years. Slowly, the discrepancies emerged. A boundary line that shifted 300 yards between surveys done 6 months apart. A water source that appeared and disappeared depending on who'd done the mapping. Property descriptions that contradicted each other in ways that always seemed to favor Kane's interests. He's been doing this for at least a decade, Reed said, anger tight in his voice. Paying surveyors to manipulate records, using his political connections to make it all look legitimate. Can you testify to that? I can do better than testify. I can bring evidence. Reed began organizing documents into a leather case. Official territorial surveys that prove Kane's claims are fraudulent, testimony from other surveyors who refuse to participate in his schemes. Hell, I can probably get 3 other ranchers who've lost land to come forward. Hope flared in Ethan's chest. Will it be enough? Against Morrison? Maybe not. But this goes beyond Morrison now. This is territorial-level fraud. I can get federal authorities involved. We need something that works tomorrow morning. Reed met his eyes. Then we ride back together, and I'll make damn sure Commissioner Holloway has everything she needs to bury Kane in his own corruption. They left within the hour, riding hard for Carlisle with Reed's evidence packed carefully in saddlebags. Ethan's exhaustion had faded, replaced by something fiercer. Kane had made a mistake. He'd gotten greedy, moved too fast, left a trail that could finally be followed back to him, and now he was going to pay for it. They reached Carlisle late that evening. Ethan went straight to the land office, found Clara and Holloway still buried in paperwork, both looking exhausted and grim. Clara's head snapped up when he walked in. Relief flooded her face. "You made it! Told you I would!" He gestured to Reed, who was already spreading documents across Holloway's desk. "And I brought help." The next hour was a blur of cross-referencing, note-taking, and strategic planning. Reed laid out his evidence with the precision of someone who'd spent years documenting the truth. Holloway absorbed it all with growing satisfaction. "This is good," she said finally. "Really good. With this, we can argue that Kane's entire claim is part of a fraudulent pattern." "Will Morrison listen?" Clara asked. "Morrison's going to have to listen, because if he doesn't, I'm taking this straight to the territorial governor." Holloway's smile was sharp. "Kane's been operating with impunity for too long. Tomorrow, that ends." The hearing the next morning was packed. Half the county had shown up, sensing blood in the water. Clara sat beside Ethan in the front row, her spine straight and her jaw set. Behind them, she could feel the weight of watching eyes. Judge Morrison entered, and the room fell silent. He was a heavy man with jowls and cold eyes, wearing his authority like armor. Kane sat across the aisle with his lawyer, a slick-talking man from Denver named Harrison, who charged fees most ranchers couldn't dream of affording. Morrison banged his gavel. "We're here to settle the matter of water rights and boundary disputes between Victor Kane and Clara Cross, formerly Whitmore. Mr. Harrison, present your case." Harrison stood, smooth and confident. He laid out Kane's claims with practiced ease. The forged water rights agreement, the disputed boundary lines, all of it presented as simple fact. Clara's hands clenched in her lap. Ethan's hand covered hers, steady and warm. When Harrison finished, Morrison looked at Holloway. "Commissioner, I assume you're representing Mrs. Cross?" "I am, Your Honor. And I'm also here to present evidence of systematic fraud." Morrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Fraud is a serious accusation. "So is forging documents and manipulating property records." Holloway stood. "Your Honor, I have testimony from Samuel Reed, Territorial Survey Officer, along with documented evidence showing that Mr. Kane has engaged in this exact pattern of behavior at least 4 times in the past decade." "Objection," Harrison said immediately. "This hearing is about the specific claims against Mrs. Cross, not speculation about other cases." "It's not speculation when we have proof." Reed stood, his voice carrying authority. "I've brought official survey records that directly contradict the claims Mr. Kane's surveyor filed. Records that show boundary lines being manipulated, water sources being moved on paper but not in reality, a pattern of corruption that benefits one man, Victor Kane." The room erupted in whispers. Morrison banged his gavel. "Order!" Kane's face had gone pale. Clara watched him with grim satisfaction. "Your Honor," Holloway continued, "we're not just asking you to dismiss Mr. Kane's current claims. We're asking you to recognize that these claims are part of a larger criminal enterprise designed to steal land from struggling ranchers." Morrison was silent for a long moment. Clara could almost see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The weight of his connection to Kane balanced against the weight of evidence that was now public. Finally, he spoke. "I'll need to review this evidence before making a ruling. This hearing is postponed until I've had time to examine all documents presented." "Your Honor," Harrison started. "Postponed," Morrison repeated, voice hard. "We'll reconvene in 1 week." He banged the gavel and left before anyone could protest. The room exploded into conversation. Clara sat frozen, trying to process what had just happened. "Is that good?" she asked Holloway quietly. "It's not bad. Morrison didn't rule in Kane's favor, which means he's worried about the evidence. He's buying time to figure out how to protect himself." Holloway gathered her papers. "But we've got him on the defensive now. That's a start." Clara looked across the aisle. Kane was speaking with Harrison in low, urgent tones. When he noticed her watching, his expression went cold, hard. This wasn't over, not even close. Outside the courthouse, people clustered in groups, talking in excited whispers. Clara caught fragments as she passed. "Never seen Morrison look that worried." About time someone stood up to Kane. "Think the widow's actually going to win?" Ethan's hand was firm at the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd toward their horses. When they were finally clear, Clara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "That was terrifying," Ethan offered. "I was going to say intense, but terrifying works too." Samuel Reed approached, shaking his head. "Morrison's going to try to make this go away quietly. Probably offer Kane a deal, drop the claims, we forget about the fraud investigation." "Will that work?" Clara asked. "Depends on how scared Morrison is of territorial authorities getting involved." Reed's expression was grim. "But even if he does rule against Kane, there'll be consequences. Men like Kane don't take losses well." Clara already knew that, had known it from the moment she'd agreed to fight. But knowing it and living it were different things. They rode back to the ranch in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Walter was waiting with more bad news. "Lost 3 more cattle overnight. Different pasture, different water source." His voice was tight. "And there's something else." He led them to the barn. Someone had painted a message across the doors in large, dripping letters. "Sell or suffer." Clara stared at the words, feeling cold rage settle into her bones. "He's escalating," Ethan said quietly. "Let him." Clara turned away from the barn. "We're not selling, and we're not backing down." "Clara, no." She faced him, Ethan, Walter, and Reed, all watching her with varying degrees of concern. "Kane thinks he can scare us into submission. He's wrong. Every threat he makes, every animal he kills, every piece of property he damages, it's more evidence against him. So let him escalate. Let him get desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. And desperate men also get violent," Walter said bluntly. "Then we'll be ready for violence." Clara's jaw set. "I'm not losing this ranch. Not to Kane, not to fear, not to anything." Ethan studied her face, then nodded slowly. "All right, then we dig in. Make this place a fortress." Over the next 3 days, they did exactly that. Reed stayed to help, along with a handful of other ranchers who'd heard about the confrontation in court and decided they were tired of watching Kane take whatever he wanted. They posted watches around the clock, moved the remaining cattle to pastures closer to the house where they could be monitored, set up tripwires and bells that would sound if anyone approached after dark. Clara barely slept. Every noise made her reach for the rifle she now kept beside the bed. Every shadow looked like a threat. On the 4th night, the attack came. Clara woke to the sound of breaking glass and Walter's shout. She was on her feet with her rifle in hand before her eyes fully focused, running toward the sound in her nightdress and bare feet. The barn was on fire. Flames licked up the sides of the structure, fed by hay and dry wood. Through the smoke, Clara could see figures moving, men on horseback, riding away into the darkness. "Get water!" Ethan was already running toward the well, grabbing buckets. Walter and 2 of the ranch hands were fighting the flames with whatever they could find. Reed appeared with more buckets, his face grim in the firelight. Clara joined them, working frantically to contain the blaze before it spread to other buildings. The heat was intense, singeing her hair and blistering her hands. Smoke choked her lungs, but slowly, painfully, they got it under control. By the time the fire was out, the barn was a blackened ruin. They'd saved the house and the other outbuildings, but the damage was catastrophic. Tools, feed, equipment, all of it destroyed. Clara stood staring at the wreckage as dawn broke, her hands burned and her face streaked with soot. Ethan appeared beside her, equally filthy. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not stopping this, for—" "Don't." She turned to him. "This isn't your fault, it's Kane's, and he's going to answer for it." We don't have proof it was him. We have 5 witnesses who saw men riding away. We have timing that's too convenient to be coincidence. Clara's voice was hard. And we have a judge who's already worried about how this looks. This just made his decision a lot easier. Walter approached, coughing. Lost most of the winter feed stores. Equipment's gone. We can salvage some of it, but he didn't finish. Didn't need to. The financial hit was staggering. Clara did quick mental math and felt sick. Between the poisoned cattle and the destroyed barn, they were looking at losses that would take years to recover from, if they survived that long. We rebuild, she said firmly. Start today. Walter, take inventory of what we've got left. Ethan, ride to Carlisle and report this to Holloway. Make sure she documents everything. What are you going to do? Clara looked at the ruins of her barn, then at the people standing with her, her husband, her foreman, the men who'd chosen to stand beside her against a man with 10 times their resources. I'm going to make a list, she said. Every person in this county who's ever been hurt by Cain, every rancher he's cheated, every family he's driven out, every piece of corruption he's gotten away with. She met Ethan's eyes. And then I'm going to make sure every single one of them knows we're fighting back. Because Cain's biggest advantage has always been that people are afraid to stand together against him. You're going to start a war. No. Clara's smile was cold. I'm going to finish one. Word of the barn fire spread through the county like flame through dry grass. By noon the next day, people Clara barely knew started arriving at the ranch, some bringing lumber, some bringing tools, a few just bringing themselves, and a willingness to work. Margaret Davies showed up with her 3 grown sons and a wagon full of nails. Cain drove my late husband to drink with his bullying, she said, voice flat. Took him 8 years to die from it. I've got no love for that man. Tom Brennan arrived with 2 ranch hands and enough rope to rebuild half the county. He tried to buy my water rights last year. When I said no, my cattle started disappearing. Can't prove it was him, but I know. More came throughout the day. People who'd been too afraid to speak up before, who'd watched Cain consolidate power and crush opposition, who'd convinced themselves there was nothing they could do, until someone finally stood up and fought back. Clara watched them arrive with something tight in her chest. She'd spent so long believing she had to survive alone that she'd forgotten what community looked like. Ethan found her standing by the ruined barn, supervising the salvage operation. You started something, he said quietly. I just stopped being quiet. Sometimes that's all it takes. By evening, they had the foundation cleared and plans drawn for a new structure. It wouldn't be as large as the old barn, they couldn't afford that, but it would be functional, sturdy, and it would stand as proof that Cain couldn't burn them out. The hearing reconvened 5 days later. The courthouse was even more packed than before, people standing in the aisles and spilling out onto the street. The air crackled with tension. Cain sat rigid in his seat, his lawyer beside him looking considerably less confident than last time. Clara noticed several of Cain's usual allies were conspicuously absent. Judge Morrison entered, and the change in him was visible. The arrogance had been replaced by something warier. He knew the whole territory was watching now. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both parties, Morrison began, his voice careful, including the testimony of Survey Officer Reed and the documentation provided by Commissioner Holloway. Clara's hands clenched in her lap. Ethan's shoulder pressed against hers, solid and steady. The claims filed by Mr. Cain regarding water rights and boundary disputes are... Morrison paused, and Clara could see him weighing his options. Be found to be without sufficient legal merit. Furthermore, the evidence suggests irregularities in the surveying process that require additional territorial investigation. The courtroom erupted. Cain surged to his feet. This is... Morrison's gavel cracked like a gunshot. I'm not finished. Given the serious nature of the allegations, I'm referring this matter to the Territorial Attorney General's office for criminal investigation into potential fraud and document forgery. Your Honor, this is highly irregular, Harrison tried. What's irregular, Counselor, is a pattern of suspicious land transfers all benefiting one man. Morrison's expression was stone. The claims against Mrs. Cross are dismissed with prejudice. This court is adjourned. He stood and left before anyone could respond. For a moment, the courtroom was silent. Then chaos erupted, people talking, shouting, celebrating. Clara sat frozen, trying to process what had just happened. We won, Ethan said, voice stunned. Clara, we won. We didn't win. We survived. She turned to look at Kane, who was standing motionless across the aisle, staring at her with pure hatred. And he's not going to let this go. She was right. That night, 3 of Kane's ranch hands appeared at the property line. They didn't cross onto crossland, just sat their horses on the boundary, watching, waiting. Walter spotted them first. They've been there for an hour, not doing anything, just sitting. Intimidation, Ethan said grimly, showing us they can get this close anytime they want. Clara grabbed her rifle. Then let's show them we're not intimidated. She walked out to meet them, Ethan and Walter flanking her. The 3 riders watched their approach with cold eyes. Clara recognized one of them, Jack Sutton, Kane's foreman, a mean son of a bitch with a reputation for violence. Clara stopped 20 feet from the property line. You're on the border. 1 step over and you're trespassing. Sutton smiled, slow and unpleasant. Wouldn't dream of it, Mrs. Cross. Just enjoying the view. Then enjoy it somewhere else. Free country. Man can sit his horse wherever he pleases. Not when that man's been sent to threaten people. Now who said anything about threats? Sutton's smile widened. We're just neighbors being neighborly. Though I gotta say, that new barn you're building, shame if something happened to it before it's finished. Ethan stepped forward. That sounded an awful lot like a threat, Sutton. Did it? Must have misheard me. Sutton gathered his reins. Kane says to tell you congratulations on your court victory. He's real happy for you both. Real happy. The way he said it made Clara's skin crawl. And he says to remind you, Sutton continued, that winter's coming. Long winter. Hard winter. Lots of things can go wrong when it's cold and dark and nobody's watching. Is that all? For now. Sutton tipped his hat in a gesture of mock courtesy. You folks have a good evening. He and his men turned and rode away, taking their time about it. Clara stood watching until they disappeared into the dusk. He's going to escalate again. Let him try. Walter's voice was hard. We got people watching now. He makes a move. We'll be ready. But Kane's next move wasn't what any of them expected. 2 weeks later, the first snow fell. It came early that year, dusting the ground in October and promising a brutal winter ahead. Clara watched it fall from the kitchen window, calculating how much feed they had left, how many cattle could survive on reduced rations, how long their money would last. The math wasn't good. The barn fire had depleted their reserves. The poisoned cattle had cut into their herd, and while they'd won in court, the legal fees and lost productivity had left them dangerously exposed financially. They needed money, fast. We could sell some of the horses, Ethan suggested that night over dinner. Your breeding stock, that's your future. Our future. And our future doesn't mean anything if we don't survive this winter. Clara pushed food around her plate without eating. How many would we need to sell? 4, maybe 5. That would give us enough to buy feed and supplies. Do it, but keep the best ones. We're not gutting the breeding program completely. Ethan reached across the table, took her hand. We're going to make it through this. You keep saying that. Because it's true. We're tougher than Kane thinks, tougher than winter, tougher than anything this territory can throw at us. Clara wanted to believe him. But belief was a luxury when you were counting pennies and watching the temperature drop. The horses sold quickly. Ethan's reputation for quality stock was solid, and buyers came from 3 territories over. The money helped. Not enough, but enough to breathe a little easier. Then November hit, and with it came the kind of cold that turned breath to ice and made every task twice as hard. Clara and Ethan worked 16-hour days, struggling to keep livestock fed and watered when everything froze overnight. They broke ice on troughs every morning, carried hay through snowdrifts that reached their knees, patched gaps in fences with fingers so numb they could barely feel the wire. Walter, tough as he was, started showing his age. His joints stiffened in the cold. His cough got worse. Clara tried to get him to take it easier, but he just gave her a look that said he'd die before he quit. One particularly brutal morning, Clara was in the pasture trying to free a young steer that had gotten tangled in wire when her feet went out from under her. She hit the frozen ground hard, pain exploding through her shoulder. Ethan was beside her instantly. Don't move. Where does it hurt? Everywhere. She tried to sit up, gasped at the sharp pain in her shoulder. Help me up. Clara, you might have broken something. I said, help me up. He did, carefully, and she stood swaying for a moment before the world stopped spinning. Her shoulder throbbed, probably bruised, possibly worse. "You're going inside," Ethan said firmly. "I'm fine. You're hurt, and you're exhausted, and if you keep pushing like this, you're going to break." His hand settled on her shoulders, gentle on the injured one, firmer on the other. "Please, Clara. Let me handle this. Go inside and rest." The concern in his eyes undid her. She was tired. Bone tired. The kind of tired that made every task feel impossible. 2 hours, she conceded. "Then I'm back out here." 4 hours? 3. Deal. She went inside, peeled off her frozen outer layers, and collapsed onto the bed, fully intending to rest for exactly 3 hours and not a minute more. She woke 12 hours later to darkness and the sound of wind screaming against the windows. Panic hit her. She'd lost an entire day of work. Ethan and Walter had been handling everything alone. She scrambled out of bed, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, and rushed outside. The scene that greeted her stopped her cold. The ranch yard was transformed. Storm lanterns hung from posts, creating pools of light in the darkness. People moved through the light and shadow, at least a dozen of them, working despite the late hour and brutal cold. Tom Brennan was hauling hay. Margaret Davies' sons were repairing a section of fence. Others she recognized from the barn raising were scattered across the property, handling tasks that should have taken Clara and Ethan days. Ethan spotted her and crossed the yard in long strides. "You're supposed to be resting." "What is all this?" "This is people paying back a favor. Word got out you were struggling. They showed up this afternoon and refused to leave until the work was done." Clara's throat tightened. "I can't afford to pay them. Nobody's asking for payment." Ethan's expression was soft in the lantern light. "You stood up to Cain. You gave people hope that maybe they didn't have to live under his thumb forever. This is them saying thank you." She looked around at the people working in the freezing darkness, helping strangers survive a winter that wanted them dead, and something inside her finally cracked. Not broke, just opened. For so long she'd believed strength meant standing alone, fighting alone, surviving alone. But watching these people work together, supporting each other against forces bigger than any individual could face, she understood she'd been wrong. Real strength was knowing when to accept help. Ethan pulled her against him, and she let herself lean into his warmth. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Do what?" "Trust that this won't fall apart. Trust that people won't leave. Trust that—" She paused, searching for words. "Trust that I'm allowed to be happy." "You are allowed, Clara. You've earned it 1,000 times over." His arms tightened around her. "And I'm not leaving. Not ever. You're stuck with me through every winter this territory wants to throw at us." She pulled back to look at him. "That's a long time to be stuck with someone as difficult as me." "Good thing I like difficult." Despite everything, the cold, the exhaustion, the fear, Clara laughed. "You're out of your mind." "Probably. But I'm your out-of-my-mind husband, so you're stuck with that too." She kissed him then, there in the freezing darkness with half the county watching, and didn't care who saw. December brought worse cold and heavier snow. The community help continued in sporadic bursts. People would show up when they could spare time from their own struggles, do what needed doing, then disappear back into the white wilderness. But even with help, the winter was taking its toll. They lost cattle to cold and starvation despite their best efforts. Equipment broke in ways that couldn't be fixed until spring. Money dwindled to almost nothing. And through it all, Cain's men continued their surveillance, sometimes visible at the property line, sometimes just tracks in the snow showing someone had been watching. It wore on Clara's nerves like sandpaper. "He's waiting," she said one night, staring at the ceiling while Ethan breathed steadily beside her. "Waiting for us to weaken, to make a mistake." "Then we don't make mistakes. We're already making them. We're hemorrhaging money, losing livestock, one major disaster, and we're finished." Ethan rolled to face her. "We've survived this long. We'll survive longer." "You don't know that." "No," he admitted, "but I believe it. And right now, belief's all we've got." The disaster came in January. A blizzard rolled in out of nowhere, turning day to night and dropping temperatures so low that exposed skin froze in minutes. Clara and Ethan were caught in the north pasture, trying to move cattle to shelter when it hit. The world disappeared in white. Wind screamed. Snow cut like knives. "The barn!" Ethan shouted, barely audible over the storm. "We have to get to the barn. They stumbled through the blizzard, holding on to each other, using the fence line as a guide. Clara couldn't feel her hands or feet. Her lungs burned with every breath of frozen air. Ethan's grip on her arm was the only thing tethering her to reality. After what felt like hours but was probably minutes, they crashed through the barn door. Walter was already there, having made it in just ahead of the storm. "Cattle?" he asked. "Most of them are in the south pasture shelter," Ethan said, teeth chattering. "But the ones we were moving—" They all knew what that meant. The cattle caught in the open wouldn't survive. The blizzard lasted 3 days. 3 days of being trapped in the barn with dwindling supplies and no way to check on the rest of the ranch. 3 days of listening to wind that sounded like it wanted to tear the world apart. 3 days of wondering if they'd emerge to find everything they'd fought for buried under snow. When it finally passed, the silence was deafening. Clara stepped out into a landscape transformed. Snow buried everything to waist height. The world was white and still and deadly beautiful, and littered with the frozen bodies of cattle that hadn't made it to shelter. Clara counted 14 dead. Maybe more buried under the snow they hadn't found yet. Each one represented money they didn't have, resources they couldn't replace, a step closer to the failure Cain was betting on. She stood in the snow, staring at the carnage, and felt something inside her go cold and hard. "Clara!" Ethan's voice behind her. "Come inside. You can't do anything about this right now. We're going to lose everything." "We don't know that." "Look around, Ethan. Look at what winter did in 3 days. How are we supposed to survive 3 more months of this?" "The same way we've survived everything else, together, one day at a time." Clara turned to him. "That's not a plan. That's hope. And hope doesn't feed cattle or pay debts or stop Cain from—" She stopped, because standing at their property line, barely visible against the white landscape, was a lone rider, Jack Sutton. He sat his horse, watching them. Then he raised one hand in a mocking salute and rode away. The message was clear. Cain knew about the storm, knew about their losses, and was enjoying every minute of their suffering. "I'm going to kill him," Clara said, voice flat. "No, you're not." "Ethan, you're going to walk inside, get warm, eat something, and then we're going to figure out how to survive this, together." He took her arm, firm but gentle. "Cain wins if he makes you do something stupid. Don't give him that." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to grab her rifle and ride after Sutton and make Cain pay for every cow, every burned barn, every sleepless night. But Ethan was right. Losing control now would destroy everything they'd fought to build. So she went inside. They spent the next week digging out from the blizzard and taking stock of the damage. The losses were catastrophic. Between the storm, the earlier poisoning, and the general attrition of a brutal winter, their herd was down to less than half of what they'd started with. The numbers told a story Clara didn't want to read. She sat at the kitchen table one night, ledger open in front of her, and did the math 3 different ways. It always came out the same. They were going to lose the ranch. Not immediately, but by spring, when debts came due and they had to restock, there wouldn't be enough money. They'd have to sell land. And once they started selling, Cain would swoop in and take everything. Ethan found her there past midnight, staring at numbers that refused to add up to survival. "How bad?" he asked quietly. "Bad." She closed the ledger. "We need at least $3,000 to make it through to spring with enough left to rebuild. We have maybe 800. What if we sold more horses?" "You don't have enough stock left to make that kind of money, not without destroying your breeding program completely." "Then what do we do?" Clara looked at him, at this man who'd gambled everything to stand beside her, who'd worked himself to exhaustion trying to save a ranch that might be unsavable, who looked at her like she was worth fighting impossible battles for. And she made a decision. "We ask for help." Ethan blinked. "What?" "We go to the other ranchers, the ones who helped with the barn, the ones who've suffered under Cain. We tell them the truth, that we're drowning and we need help to survive, and we ask them to invest in the ranch." "Clara, that's risky. I know. We'd be giving up partial ownership, letting other people have a say in how we run things." She met his eyes. "But it's either that or lose everything. At least this way we keep fighting. We keep the land in the hands of people Cain hasn't crushed yet." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "You've spent years fighting to keep this place independent. Now you're willing to share it? I'm willing to do whatever it takes to keep it out of Cain's hands." Clara stood, crossed to him. "And I learned something this winter. Independence isn't the same as isolation. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you can't survive alone. He pulled her close, rested his forehead against hers. When did you get so wise? About 5 minutes ago? Ask me again tomorrow and I'll probably have changed my mind. But she didn't change her mind. The next week, they called a meeting at the ranch. 23 people showed up, cramming into the house until there was barely room to breathe. Ranchers, shopkeepers, the blacksmith from Carlisle, even Margaret Davies with her sharp eyes and sharper tongue. Clara stood in front of them all and told the truth. We're not going to survive this winter without help. Kane's been bleeding us dry with sabotage and legal fees. The blizzard finished what he started. Right now, we're looking at losing everything by spring. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Clara pressed on. But Kane doesn't just want our ranch. He wants control of this entire region, and he'll keep taking, piece by piece, until there's nothing left that isn't under his thumb. She looked around at the faces watching her. Unless we stop him, not just me and Ethan, all of us, together. Tom Brennan spoke up. What are you proposing? A cooperative. Multiple ranchers pooling resources, sharing costs, supporting each other through the hard times. We formalize what we've already been doing, helping each other survive. Clara pulled out papers she and Ethan had drafted. Anyone who invests becomes a partial owner. Profits get shared. Decisions get made together. It's not perfect, but it's a way to build something Kane can't destroy by targeting one operation at a time. The room erupted in conversation. People arguing, debating, some excited, some skeptical. Margaret Davies cut through the noise. How much you need? Minimum investment is $100. We need at least 20 investors to make this work. I'm in for 200, Margaret said flatly. Kane tried to steal my husband's legacy. I'll be damned if I let him win now. Tom Brennan nodded. Count me in for 150. One by one, people committed. Some with money, some with labor, some with equipment and supplies. By the time the meeting ended, Clara had pledges totaling over $4,000. More than enough to survive the winter. More than enough to rebuild. More than enough to show Kane that his time ruling through fear and intimidation was ending. That night, Clara and Ethan sat on their porch, despite the cold, wrapped in blankets and watching stars emerge in the clear sky. We did it, Ethan said quietly. We survived. That's not the same as winning. It's not losing either. Clara leaned against him, exhausted and relieved and still terrified of all the ways this could still go wrong. Kane's going to hate this. We just took away his advantage. Good. Let him hate it. Let him see that people aren't afraid anymore. The winter dragged on, brutal and unforgiving, but the cooperative held. When one ranch struggled, others helped. When supplies ran low, people shared. When Kane's men tried more intimidation, they found themselves facing united resistance instead of isolated fear. And slowly, painfully, the Cross Ranch stabilized. February brought a thaw. Not spring yet, but a promise of it. The snow began to melt. Frozen earth started yielding, and for the first time in months, Clara let herself believe they might actually survive. She was in the barn, checking on a pregnant mare, when Ethan found her. Rider coming, fast. Clara's hand went to the rifle she now carried everywhere. Kane's men? Don't think so. Looks like official business. They met the rider in the yard. It was a territorial marshal Clara didn't recognize, his badge glinting in the weak sunlight. Mrs. Cross? Mr. Cross? I'm Marshal William Hayes. I have news regarding Victor Kane. Clara's heart hammered. What kind of news? The territorial investigation into his land dealings concluded yesterday. They found evidence of fraud, forgery, bribery, and conspiracy stretching back 15 years. Hayes pulled out an official-looking document. Kane's been arrested. His assets are being seized pending trial, and all land transfers deemed fraudulent are being reversed. Clara stared at him. He's been arrested? This morning, he's being held in Cheyenne awaiting trial. The relief that flooded through her was so intense it was almost painful. Kane was finished. His empire was collapsing. The threat that had hung over them all winter was finally, actually over. Ethan's arm came around her shoulders, steadying her. What happens to his ranch? That'll be decided at trial. But given the scope of the corruption, it's likely to be broken up and sold. Some of it will go back to the original owners he stole it from. Hayes tucked the document away. Just thought you'd want to know. You folks did a brave thing standing up to him. After he left, Clara and Ethan stood in silence, processing what had just happened. "It's over," Clara said finally. "Yeah, we won. We survived. Same thing, really." She turned to look at him. "Do you think we would have made it without each other?" "No, not a chance in hell." He pulled her close. "But we didn't have to. That's the point." Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought hope with it. The cooperative ranches began to thrive. Cattle that had survived the winter grew fat on new grass. Foals were born in Ethan's pastures. And slowly, painfully, the scars of winter began to heal. Clara stood in the rebuilt barn one morning, listening to the sounds of a ranch coming back to life, and realized something had changed. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of losing everything, not of being alone, not of the future. Because whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. She had Ethan. She had Walter. She had a community of people who'd chosen to stand together instead of falling separately. And she had the knowledge that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you need help and accept it when it's offered. Ethan found her there, leaning against a stall door with a small smile on her face. "What are you thinking about?" "How far we've come, how much we survived, and how I almost lost all of this because I was too stubborn to ask for help." He moved beside her, shoulder touching hers. "But you did ask. That took more courage than fighting alone ever could." Clara looked at him, at the man who'd ridden back into her life and refused to let her face it alone. Who'd fought beside her instead of trying to fight for her. Who'd shown her that partnership wasn't weakness. "I love you," she said. "I don't think I've actually said that yet." Ethan's smile was slow and warm. "You've said it, just not with words." "Well, I'm saying it now, with words. I love you, Ethan Cross. And I'm glad fate's a stubborn bastard." "Me too." He kissed her there in the barn, with spring sunlight streaming through gaps in the new boards, and the future stretching out before them, uncertain but no longer terrifying. Because they'd survived winter together, and if they could survive that, they could survive anything. The years that followed weren't easy. Anyone who thought surviving one winter meant the hard times were over didn't know Wyoming. But they were different, better in ways Clara hadn't known to hope for. The cooperative grew. By the second year, 32 ranching families had joined, creating a network strong enough to weather market fluctuations, bad seasons, and the occasional rustler who thought scattered operations made easy targets. They learned fast that 32 ranches watching each other's backs was a different proposition entirely. Kane's trial happened that summer in Cheyenne. Clara and Ethan made the trip to testify, along with Reed and a dozen other ranchers Kane had victimized over the years. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Kane was convicted on 14 counts of fraud, 6 counts of forgery, and conspiracy to deprive citizens of their property rights. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in territorial prison. Clara watched him led away in chains and felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, not even relief. Just a sort of hollow recognition that this man had taken up so much space in her life, so much fear and anger and resistance, and now he was just a middle-aged criminal being shuffled off to prison. All that power he'd wielded had been built on intimidation, and the moment people stopped being afraid, it had collapsed like wet paper. "You all right?" Ethan asked as they left the courthouse. "Yeah. Just thinking how much time I wasted hating him." "Wasn't wasted. That anger kept you fighting." "Maybe, but I'm done with it now." Clara looked at her husband. "I want to spend whatever time we've got left building things, not tearing them down." They rode home to a ranch that was starting to thrive. The cattle herd had been rebuilt with stock purchased collectively through the cooperative. Ethan's horses were gaining reputation across 3 territories. People came from Montana and Colorado to buy cross-ranch breeding stock. And in November of that year, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The realization hit her one morning when she couldn't keep breakfast down for the 3rd day running. She was 37 years old, had long since given up on the idea of children, and the news terrified her more than Kane ever had. She told Ethan that night, the words coming out clumsy and uncertain. "I'm pregnant." He'd been reading a livestock journal. The book fell from his hands. "You're what?" "Pregnant. With a baby. Our baby." Ethan's face went through about 5 different expressions before settling on something between joy and panic. Are you sure?" "Pretty sure, yeah." "When?" Best I can figure, sometime in May. He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulled her into his arms. Clara felt him trembling. I'm going to be a father. You sound terrified. I am terrified. Aren't you? Completely. Clara pulled back to look at him. I'm almost 38. I have no idea how to be a mother, and this ranch is barely stable. What if... Hey, he cupped her face in his hands. We survived Cain. We survived winter. We'll survive this too. That's different. You can fight winter with hard work. You can't work your way through being a terrible parent. So we'll figure it out, same way we figure everything else out, together. Their daughter was born in late May during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and turned the yard to mud. The labor was long and brutal, and Clara screamed enough curses to shock even Walter, who'd wisely retreated to the barn. But when the midwife finally placed a squalling, red-faced infant in her arms, Clara looked down at this tiny person they'd made and felt something shift in her chest. A different kind of fear. Not the survival kind that had driven her for so many years. This was the terrifying recognition that she loved something more than her own life now. She's perfect, Ethan whispered, staring at their daughter with undisguised awe. She's wrinkly and loud. Perfect, he insisted. They named her Sarah, after Clara's mother, and discovered immediately that newborns didn't care about ranching schedules, weather, or the fact that their parents needed sleep to function. Those first months were a blur of exhaustion. Clara learned to nurse while reviewing supply orders. Ethan became expert at changing diapers one-handed while bottle-feeding orphaned calves with the other. Walter took one look at the chaos and hired 2 additional ranch hands so Clara and Ethan could focus on keeping the tiny human alive. She's got lungs like her mother, Walter observed one particularly loud night. That's not a compliment, Clara muttered, rocking a screaming Sarah at 2 in the morning. Wasn't meant to be. Meant to be a fact. But despite the exhaustion and the fear and the constant certainty that they were doing everything wrong, Sarah thrived. She grew from a wrinkly newborn into a chubby infant with Ethan's dark hair and Clara's stubborn chin. And Clara discovered that loving someone this much didn't make her weaker. If anything, it made her fiercer. 2 years later, their son Thomas was born. 2 years after that, another daughter named Elizabeth. The house that had been too quiet for so long became chaotic with children's voices, scattered toys, and the kind of beautiful mess Clara had never imagined wanting. She'd thought survival was the goal. Turned out it was just the foundation for actually living. The cooperative continued to grow and evolve. What had started as a desperate alliance of struggling ranchers became something more structured. They established collective buying for supplies, group marketing for their cattle and horses, even a small lending fund for members who hit hard times. Other counties started copying the model. Within 5 years, cooperative ranches dotted Wyoming, Montana, and Colorado. The power dynamics that had allowed men like Cain to dominate entire regions began to shift. People learned that standing together was stronger than standing alone. Clara found herself in an unexpected role. Not just a rancher, but a sort of informal leader for the movement. People wrote asking for advice on setting up cooperatives. She traveled to other territories to speak about what they'd built, always bringing Ethan because public speaking made her want to hide in the barn. You're better at this than me, she'd argue. You're the one they want to hear from, the widow who stood up to Cain and won. We stood up to Cain, all of us. Yeah, but you started it. That matters. Clara hated the attention, but she understood the responsibility. If her story could help other people find the courage to fight for what was theirs, then talking about it was worth the discomfort. The ranch itself became legendary, not because it was the biggest or richest, but because of what it represented. Proof that collaboration worked, that community mattered, that the frontier didn't have to be every person for themselves. Visitors came regularly, some looking for business opportunities, some wanting to learn about cooperative ranching, some just curious about the woman and man who'd built an empire out of stubbornness and second chances. Clara found it all vaguely embarrassing. We're not special, she told a reporter from a Denver newspaper who showed up wanting to write about frontier pioneers building the future. You faced down one of the most powerful men in Wyoming and won, the reporter countered. That's pretty special. We survived. That's not heroic, it's just what people do. Ethan, listening from across the room, smiled. That was Clara, incapable of seeing herself the way others did. To her, they'd just done what needed doing, which was exactly why people admired her. Walter aged into his 70s, still working the ranch, though he finally accepted some limitations. The younger hands handled the heavy lifting. Walter handled the wisdom, teaching Clara's children about horses and cattle and the kind of practical knowledge you couldn't learn from books. "You gonna retire someday?" Clara asked him one afternoon as they watched Sarah, now 10 years old, learning to rope. "What would I do? Sit around waiting to die?" Walter spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Rather work until I drop." "You're too stubborn to drop. Learn from the best." Sarah managed to rope a fence post and whooped in triumph. Thomas and Elizabeth, watching from the corral fence, cheered. Walter allowed himself a small smile. "You done good with them kids, ma'am. They're tough, smart. Gonna be fine ranchers someday." "If they want to be ranchers." Walter looked at her. "You gonna let them choose something different?" "I'm gonna teach them everything I know. Then I'm going to step back and let them figure out who they want to be." Clara watched her children. "This ranch almost killed me with its demands. I won't force that on them." "That's the difference between you and Cain right there. He wanted to own everything, control everything. You just want folks to be free to choose." Clara hadn't thought about Cain in years. Heard he died in prison 3 winters back, pneumonia or something. She'd felt nothing when Walter brought her the news. The man who'd once dominated her thoughts had become irrelevant. Turned out the best revenge was forgetting someone existed. The children grew. Sarah inherited her mother's sharp tongue and her father's way with horses. Thomas was quieter, more thoughtful, with a head for numbers that made him invaluable during buying and selling negotiations. Elizabeth was pure, stubborn determination wrapped in a deceptively sweet smile. Clara watched them navigate childhood and adolescence and felt the strange tension of wanting to protect them from everything, while knowing the only way they'd survive was learning to handle difficulties themselves. "You're brooding," Ethan said one evening. They were on the porch, their porch, where they'd spent countless evenings watching the sun set over land they'd nearly lost. "I'm thinking about when to start teaching Sarah about running the cooperative. She's 14. I was running a household at 14. Different time, different circumstances." Ethan rocked his chair back on 2 legs, a habit that still made Clara nervous after 20 years. "Let her be a kid a little longer. And if something happens to us, who runs things? Then the cooperative we built will support itself like it's designed to. That's the point. No single person's indispensable." Clara knew he was right, but letting go of control, even hypothetically, still felt dangerous. Some lessons took longer to learn than others. The territory changed around them. Railroads expanded, connecting distant towns. Telegraph lines spread across the landscape. The frontier was slowly becoming less frontier and more just. America. Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890. Clara was 43, Ethan 46, and they attended the celebrations in Cheyenne with a mixture of pride and cynicism. "Think anything will actually change?" Clara asked, watching politicians give speeches about progress and opportunity. "Probably not. Same power games, just different players." "Comforting." "Realistic." Ethan took her hand. "But we've built something those politicians can't touch. Community that doesn't depend on whoever's in charge." The cooperative was 38 ranches strong by then, managing over 50,000 acres collectively. They'd weathered droughts, harsh winters, market crashes, and the occasional attempt by outside interests to break them up. They'd survived because they'd learned Cain's real lesson, not how to dominate, but what happened when you tried. True power wasn't in controlling everything. It was in creating systems that worked even when you weren't the one running them. Sarah eventually did join the cooperative's management, but on her own terms and timeline. Thomas surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer, using his skills to help small ranchers navigate the increasingly complex legal landscape. Elizabeth married a rancher from Montana and started her own cooperative branch up north. All 3 inherited their parents' stubbornness and their mother's inability to back down from a fight worth fighting. Clara and Ethan aged into their 50s, then 60s, still working the ranch but increasingly letting the next generation take over the day-to-day operations. Their bodies wore down from decades of hard labor. Clara's hands developed arthritis that made cold mornings painful. Ethan's back stiffened from too many years of physical work. But they kept going because stopping felt like giving up. And neither of them knew how to do that. Walter died in his sleep at 79, which Clara figured was exactly how he'd have wanted it. No fuss, no suffering, just here one day and gone the next. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Clara cried for the first time in years. He was family, she told Ethan. Yeah, he was. They stood by his grave for a long time, remembering the gruff old man who'd stuck by them through everything, who'd never questioned Clara's right to run things her way, who'd taught their children to be tough without being cruel. The frontier was changing, but some things, loyalty, community, the bonds forged through shared struggle, those remained. Clara turned 70 in 1917. The world was at war in Europe, though it felt distant from Wyoming rangeland. Her hair had gone completely gray. Her hands were gnarled from arthritis and decades of hard work. She moved slower than she used to, and every old injury from a lifetime of ranching made itself known on cold mornings. But she could still outwork most people half her age when she put her mind to it. Ethan, at 73, was in worse shape. Years of ranch work had taken their toll on his back and knees. But he still spent mornings with his horses, still had that same easy confidence around animals that had first drawn Clara to his ranch all those years ago. They sat on their porch one evening in early summer, watching thunderclouds build over the mountains, and Clara felt the weight of all those years. You ever regret it? She asked. Regret what? Coming back into my life. Taking on a struggling ranch and a stubborn woman and all the chaos that came with it. Ethan was quiet for a moment. You asking because you regret it? No, just wondering if you do. Clara, you've given me 33 years of arguing, adventure, and never knowing what tomorrow's going to bring. Why the hell would I regret that? She smiled. We've had a good run, haven't we? Better than good. He reached over, took her hand. His grip wasn't as strong as it used to be, but it was still steady. Still there. Best decision I ever made was writing to that dance and asking you to give me a chance. Best decision I ever made was saying yes. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the storm roll in. They'd weathered so many storms, literal and metaphorical, that one more didn't seem like much to worry about. Clara's health began failing that winter. Small things at first, fatigue that didn't improve with rest, a cough that wouldn't go away. By spring, she had to admit something was seriously wrong. The doctor from Carlisle came out to the ranch, examined her, and delivered the news with practiced gentleness. Her heart was giving out. Could be months, could be a year. No real treatment beyond rest and accepting limitations. Clara listened to his recommendations and promptly ignored most of them. I'm not spending my last month sitting in a chair, she told Ethan after the doctor left. Clara, no, I've worked this ranch my entire adult life. I'll work it until I can't anymore. That's not negotiable. Ethan looked at her with frustration and love and resignation all mixed together. You're the most impossible woman I've ever met. Good thing you like impossible. She kept working, though she let Sarah handle more of the physical tasks. Spent her mornings with the horses she'd loved for decades, her afternoons reviewing cooperative business, her evenings on the porch with Ethan, talking about everything and nothing. The children visited more often, bringing grandchildren Clara barely had the energy to keep up with. She watched them run around the ranch yard and felt satisfaction knowing this place would continue after she was gone, that maybe all the fighting and struggling and refusing to quit had actually meant something. She died on a Tuesday morning in October, 71 years old, with Ethan holding her hand and Sarah crying quietly in the corner. Her last words were characteristically practical. Make sure the north pasture fence gets fixed before winter, and don't let Thomas sell off the breeding mares. We'll need them come spring. Then she closed her eyes and stopped fighting. The funeral drew people from across 3 states. Ranchers she'd helped through hard times. Cooperative members whose operations existed because she'd shown them another way. Politicians and businessmen who'd learned you didn't push Clara Cross around without consequences. They buried her next to Walter on the hill overlooking the ranch, under Wyoming sky that went on forever. Ethan stood by her grave long after everyone else had left, trying to figure out how to exist in a world without her in it. He managed for 3 years, kept working the ranch, though his heart wasn't in it the same way, spent time with his children and grandchildren, took comfort in the cooperative they'd built still thriving, still providing for families across the territory. But the loneliness was crushing. He died in his sleep at 76, and they buried him beside Clara like everyone knew they should be. Together, like they'd been for 36 years of marriage, and countless years before that in memory and loss and stubborn hope. The Cross Ranch continued. Sarah ran it with the same fierce determination her mother had shown, though with less of the isolation and more of the community. The cooperative expanded, adapted, survived market crashes and changing times and all the other challenges that killed operations that tried to stand alone. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the work was done, and the sun was setting over land that had been fought for and bled for and loved fiercely, people said you could feel something in the air on that hill where Clara and Ethan were buried. Not ghosts exactly, just a presence, a reminder. That love wasn't about smooth sailing or easy answers. That partnership meant fighting beside someone, not for them. That real strength came from admitting you needed help and accepting it when offered. That two broken people who chose each other every single day could build something that outlasted them both. The ranch stood for generations, passing through children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The cooperative model spread across the West, helping countless families survive in a landscape that tried to kill the weak and crush the isolated. And every new rancher who joined the cooperative heard the story, how it started with a widow who refused to quit, a man who'd never stopped loving her, and a winter that tried to destroy them both but ended up forging them into something stronger instead. The details got embellished over the years, the way stories do. But the core truth remained. Clara and Ethan Cross had proven something the frontier desperately needed to learn. That survival wasn't about being the biggest or the strongest or the most ruthless. It was about being stubborn enough to keep choosing each other, smart enough to accept help when you needed it, brave enough to stand up to power that thought it was untouchable, and human enough to understand that sometimes the best thing you could build wasn't an empire. It was a community, a family, a legacy that said you'd been here, you'd mattered, and you'd left the world a little better than you'd found it. Not because you were perfect, not because it was easy, but because you'd refused to quit even when quitting made sense. Because you'd learned that being strong didn't mean standing alone. Because you'd figured out that the secret to surviving impossible odds was making sure nobody had to face them by themselves. That was the real lesson of the Cross Ranch. Not that love conquers all, that's romantic nonsense. But that love, combined with stubbornness, community, and the refusal to let bastards win, could build something that lasted long after the people who built it were dust. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.